Okay, thank you. And good afternoon. Thanks for having me. And honestly, I don't have anything that is prepared, and so this could either be 10 minutes or it could be 2 hours. I can probably talk about YDC and what we do for 2 hours easily, but I'm gonna try and not do that. I'll give you a little bit of background for me because it is relevant to YDC and what we do. I've been a judge since 2017 and in juvenile since 2018. So almost 6 years in juvenile, 4 that spent in dependency and the other year and a half in juvenile justice. But I was a public defender for 24 years in Orange County before on the bench. And I started with the public defender's office in 1993 in juvenile, doing juvenile delinquency, not juvenile justice, juvenile delinquency. So I have a point of reference. I have a history and I have a point of reference to look at and determine, to get an idea of where we come from and where we're at and whether what we do now is more or less successful. In 1993, juvenile 602s were juvenile criminal. It was just really juvenile criminal. We did trials and kids either ended up being acquitted or on probation or in the hall or YA. That was the extent of juvenile delinquency. That was the focus. It was not service oriented. It was not trauma informed. It wasn't service and or programming at all. And so there are big differences between then and now, in what the DA's office did, the probation office did, how they handled what their role was and how they handled it. And so now, fast forwarding 30 years, everything is about programs. It's about services. It is about treating the underlying trauma, recognizing and treating the underlying trauma and addressing that in ways that we never did in 1993. YDC, and one of the things that we do differently now is the collaborative courts. I don't think they existed at all in 1993. So now everything in juvenile is about collaborative courts. Teen court, we have Grace Court for the sexually exploited children, crossover youth court. We have a juvenile recovery court. Mine is YDC, which is Youth Development Court. It is approximately 37 participants at the moment. I say kids, but they range in age from 14 to 24. There are some that I can have jurisdiction over until they're 25, and so, but it's up to 24 in YDC. There are 37 participants at the moment. I think we've had as many as 60 maybe, and that's probably the top end of what it is. But YDC is absolutely a collaborative court, and it focuses on individual cases. In order to get in YDC, you have to have a sustained petition for a 707 offense. So these are the most serious of juvenile probation participants. 707 is the list of serious and violent felonies that, for the most part, can be tried as an adult. So you think murders, attempt murder, robberies, gang cases, anything that is on that list. You need to have one of those in order to be a YDC participant. So that's the starting point, a jumping off point. And the way that we fashion YDC, usually it comes with a long-term commitment. It can be anywhere from 2 years to 4 years in custody, with the idea is that somewhere within that, maybe halfway through that initial commitment, we start looking at an early release. An early release is all about looking at programming for and reentry services for, tied to that release. We focus on when we, leading up to and at that point of that release, what reentry services do we provide in order to ensure success on probation? And since it's collaborative, I have representatives at every YDC session, and they're the second and the fourth Fridays of the month. And it tops out at 12 participants on any day. And I have representatives, obviously, from the DA's office and defense lawyers. Mental health, Orange County Mental Health is there. Our community partners, Underground Grit and Project Kinship, are always there. Representatives from the educational programs, which are a huge part of YDC and reentry services. Underground Scholars, which is at UCI. Project Rebound at Cal State Fullerton is there regularly. Cypress College is represented regularly. Sometimes I have representatives from LCAD, which is Laguna College of Art and Design. I have representatives from some of the Neutral Ground. Anybody who has something to offer in terms of reentry service, I encourage to be present. And the point of the collaborative is when we talk about services for somebody in particular, the program that is there to offer those services is right there. There is no lag time. There is no discussion about, well, you know, sometime after you leave today, I want you to get in touch with this person and set up these services, whether it's counseling, whether it's substance abuse treatment, whether it's meetings, whether it's educationally. Somebody is right there in the courtroom for them to talk to and say, this is your plan. I'm going to write down your plan. This is what we're doing. So there's no lag time, because if there is any, they fall into a hole and it never happens. So it's really important to have people in the courtroom for the collaboratives in order to take that next step. And reentry services, I mean, a lot of it focuses on education. Education, we've decided and determined, is one of the best preventative factors with regard to recidivism. When you talk about kids in 2-year programs, 4-year programs, anything that is advanced education, the recidivism rates drop dramatically. And so we're really trying to tie as many educational services, and that doesn't necessarily need to be a 2 or a 4-year program. It can be certificate programs, it can be trade schools, it can be any of those options. And so having somebody, a representative, who can say, this is what we have available, to give them to immediately jump into is critical. We will tie them in with employment services. YOW is there, Waymakers is there. They're all present at these sessions in order to offer whatever services they can provide. One of the unique factors, unique things about juvenile law, recent juvenile law has said that where something is a term and condition of probation, where it's ordered as a term and condition of probation, courts can't terminate them. They cannot violate them on probation if the individuals are not able to pay for those services. And we know that there's a lot of things that we'd love to have our kids doing, but there's no funding for it. So the case law is developing. Probation actually is required to fund programs if they are terms and conditions of probation. And while I expect to get audited any minute now and run out of town on a rail, probation has been very receptive to taking on the responsibility of funding for all sorts of things that I order as a term and condition of probation. And a lot of these things are done through NYDC. We utilize a lot of these. Our mandate for YDC, as well as all probation, is for rehabilitation. And that to me is it's a big umbrella term. I look at rehabilitation as being successful in, coming off of probation and actually being successful. And that requires mind, body, education, employment, all of that. So we've ordered things like culinary classes for kids. I have ordered mindfulness services for lots of kids, meditation, yoga classes, personal trainers, gym memberships, you name it, because they're all a part of recovery and rehabilitation. And when I do that, I order funding provided from probation. it may be in like a $500, maximum, for the moment. We see where that goes. But giving them those opportunities and those options and funding for it. So there's no excuse not to, there is no inability to do it. It's a matter of hooking them up with those services and engaging in that. And that comes from, personal experience. I have a now 33-year-old son, and I remember him at 14 and 15 and 16 and 17, and the need to have physical activities, the importance of physical activities, and especially those now that are, mindfulness kind of related. They help to address substance abuse issues that are basically because of things like anxiety, trauma, stress, all of those things. And so those are there to help to give them an option other than substances in order to deal with that trauma and the stress. I have 90% of my kids that are testing positive for THC, and yoga, meditation, all those mindfulness things are uniquely designed to address all the issues that a lot of kids really, whether they know it or not, are turning to marijuana for, to deal with anxiety. And those practices help to get them to deal with the trauma rather than just ignore it, which is what the marijuana and THC does. Basically, it allows them to ignore it instead of actually dealing with it. So that's a big part of what we're doing. I have a lot of my kids, we have, if anybody's aware, we have the Pause program going on in juvenile hall at the moment that Cell Dogs is running, where they have rescue dogs living with kids in Tango. And these are, a lot of them are YDC kids, teaching them all about, dog, its training and its handling, and it's a great program. It teaches so many different things to kids in terms of resilience and empathy and responsibility, all those things, on top of giving them actually a marketable skill. There's a lot of jobs and good paying jobs for, people out in the pet industry. And honestly, a lot of people in that field, they are people that these kids can identify with. They actually are credible because I know lots of them in the industry. They look like these kids. They have ink, they're edgy. So they're people that they can relate to, they can respond to. And so that's a world that kind of, this kind of thing, this kind of program, the Pause program, opens up for them. It is one example. We have Open Gate, I believe, which is coming in and doing culinary classes. I have just observed one yesterday. These are all reentry skills. They are all reentry related programs. Reentry it's the name of the game these days. That is the focus. It is all about, what do? We don't just open the door and let kids out. We may as well just keep them in or make it a revolving door. So it's all about the reentry plan and the reentry program and services. That's even reflected in, the new statutes and rules of court that we have with regard to kids returning from DJJ. What is the plan? What is the step down plan? What's the reentry plan? So all the focus is on the things that all of basically people like you are providing, are making available. So it's all about those services. With YDC, the idea is it's a long-term probation. Graduation from YDC means a successful termination from probation. And in a lot of cases, it means actual dismissals of serious cases. One of the things that we realize that these days is that prior convictions, prior adjudications, felony adjudications are a significant barrier to success. Things that have to be reported in applications, job applications, rental applications, all of those things, they come up, they pop up. So these are barriers. YDC is a unique program that allows me to, in certain circumstances, actually dismiss prior serious violent felonies and then seal those records. And it's not an easy program. There are YDC specific designated probation officers. There are 3 probation officers that do nothing but YDC kids. That is their focus. So the program, it generally, kids are in YDC, and a successful graduation from YDC probably would take, I would say 2 years at a minimum. And I've had a lot that are successfully graduating. There are a lot of community partners that through one way or another find us or we find them. We have a lot of kids in the Paul Mitchell barber program. Somehow I have an underground railroad for YDC kids to be working at Nobu in Newport Beach. They seem to have been hiring a lot of my kids. A lot are interested in the if they got to work, they're interested in the restaurant field, in the restaurant work, and so that's a great opportunity for them. And so it's in a lot of respects, it is grassroots. It relies on people finding out about us. It requires word of mouth, everybody spreading word that these programs are going on. I get people contacting me all the time about we do this. Is this a service that can be a reentry service for your kids, for your collaborative courts? It is a lot of that. It's all about how do we make their release successful, ultimately successful. And that's what YDC is all about. Yeah, that is what YDC is all about. Questions?
Perfect. Thank you. Just to start off, I realized 1, thank you for coming and joining, and then 2, thank you for what you do. For those that haven't been to YDC, I attended, I think, toward the end of last year, and it's just such a great experience where, yeah, exactly what Judge was just talking about, where like the youth have direct access to services that are right there. Services can speak up on behalf of the youth. It's such a great environment. So, I mean, if you guys are able to get involved, definitely. So that was going to tee up one of my questions to you. I know you're talking about people getting involved. 1, what are some of the gaps that you're seeing in services that are needed? And then 2, like how could organizations get involved with the court?
So anybody that's an organization that wants to get involved, one of the things, and they're not already, one of the things that I recommend is they come and observe YDC. Sit in a YDC session to get an understanding of the interaction between kids and the kids and me, kids and service providers. The way that we work YDC, there's a staffing for each kid before we call them in. So the team will talk about the individual for 10 minutes. It can be 10 minutes, it can be 2 minutes, it can be 20 minutes about what's going on, what we'd like to do, what direction we want to take. And then we include the participant, and it's another 5 minutes to half an hour discussion with them about what's going on. It's a very, a lot of times discussion, happens with me off of the bench, coming down and talking to them, sitting down and talking to them. One of the things that we've found is that it's important for them to be engaged, to have it more like a dialogue. Certain things have to happen from up on the bench, but they really feel like this is about them and they're engaged in it. If it's a more intimate discussion, essentially, like they got to care, they got to know that somebody cares about their future, really cares about what's going on and wants them to succeed. And that requires kind of this connection, this more intimate connection than with somebody sitting up on the bench. And that is true of all of the collaborative courts, I think. And so come and take a look at it, come and sit in there, observe it and see how the participants, how the providers, the service providers interact. I get them all the time, somebody, just piping up about, we've got this and I'm happy to offer that. And I'll talk to them about this and give them our information. Something I'm not thinking about necessarily, somebody will suggest. That's how it works at every one of those sessions. One of the biggest gaps that we're seeing I mean, traditionally it's been the education component, but we're really gaining on that. And we're closing it with all of the educational services that we have. Inpatient residential treatment programs, substance abuse programs for juveniles. They do not exist. I have a great one in the hall, but it's in the hall. It's a 120-day residential treatment program. But it's in the hall, and I am not aware of any residential treatment program for minors in Orange County. I haven't found one that that will do it, and so that's a huge problem, because as much as, and I've got kids, and I think that Wellmore, I've got a lot of kids at Wellmore, and I think with that Wellmore and Twintown are great programs, but I get them, attending and still testing positive. And so they need something between the intensive outpatient program that a Twintown or Wellmore can give and residential treatment, or they need residential treatment, but they're under 18 and I don't have an option for them. And that's a problem. And nobody seems to have come up with a solution for that gap. I'm happy to consider anything that somebody presents, but at the moment, that seems to be one of the biggest problems. And they all have substance related issues. It's related to the trauma. It's all related to trauma. But it's addressing those. Most of it's THC, but we're seeing, see a ton of inhalants these days. NAS and dusters, and it's insidious because they don't test positive for it. We don't pick it up on testing. It is such a short high that it encourages repeated use in order to keep that high. And we're figuring out now that it does significant long-term irreversible damage, neurological damage. And these kids have absolutely no clue that it does. And telling them this is what's going to happen, you're not going to be able to walk when you're 25 there's a huge disconnect. They don't believe it, and a lot of them may actually think, all right, I'll worry about that when I'm 25. And so this use and this addiction with NOS, with dusters, inhalants in general is a growing problem. And it's one that even treatment providers will tell you is difficult to address from a therapeutic standpoint. It's a different sort of an addiction. And so it's creating problems. Seeing a lot of inhalants in cars. So driving around with NOS tanks, and that tells me that they're driving around and using inhalants. And that's a significant safety problem.
Judge Ufland, I just have a question. Are there any current outcome measures that you're using, or are you trying to document the success within your court so that we can?
I know that the analytics is keeping track of, I don't know the results of those. I could not tell you offhand the numbers on that. You'll probably get them. Everything these days is about analytics. They're even tracking analytics on the PAWS program. They want to know, recidivism rates of kids that are involved in the dog program. How successful is it or not? So there are numbers, I am sure. I have a lot more successful graduations from YDC than unsuccessful terminations or withdrawals from YDC. Just anecdotally, I can tell you that. But I can't give you numbers off the top of my head. And everything is about tracking those and being able to tie them to, reduction in recidivism rates these days. So that is extremely important to us with all the programs. We want to know that something works. We don't want to keep throwing resources at something that is not working, but we're willing to try pretty much anything. Yes.
Sorry, my name's Fred Lapuz. I'm the director for the Office of Restorative Justice with the Catholic Diocese. I couldn't get a sound. I couldn't get any sound in the beginning, so I didn't get to even catch the first part of the presentation here. But
would you like me to repeat it?
No, that's okay.
I can do it again.
I see they got it recorded, so Megan can send it to me. But I think I got most of it though. But anyway, to Amy's question here, which she was talking about the data, the probation department should have that.
Yes.
We've worked with them before with programs. We partnered with them before, and they do a really good job of collecting that data. So it's that would probably be one place to get it.
Absolutely, they do have it.
I wanted to ask too, I'm very familiar with YGC. I've been going there for many years. One question is, and I know that that's mostly for drug treatment, the kids that are there. But is there anything or any reason why something isn't happening with the kids at juvenile hall? Number one, and number two, YGC is going to be moving over to juvenile hall at some point. Is that going to affect what you're doing right now?
What I run is YDC, Youth Development Court.
Oh, okay.
Some of my kids are at YGC, which is a facility.
Okay,
Some
yeah.
are at the hall, some are out of custody. So it's all over. So, and we should really come up with names that are more different than that.
Yeah.
It's very confusing. I have YLA, I have YGC, I have YDC. All of these acronyms tend to be 3 letters and they're all similar. I actually had not heard that YGC is looking at transitioning back to juvenile hall. Amy, maybe you know more about that from your perspective. In fact, YGC was just closed for a while due to an escape. Right. They're back there, however, and I was happy to see that they were back there. So nobody's included me in that they're planning on closing YGC and moving it into the hall. Yeah, they are. They're going to turn it into a reentry facility for adult, but that may not be happening for a couple of years. That's a lot. So if you're talking about and I forget the name of the facility that they're building, they are on the grounds, which is that reentry facility. I think that they're projecting, and I was just talking to a supervisor in the hall yesterday, that their projection, which probably at this point is extremely overly optimistic, I think was end of 2025. Yeah. And so Amy, tell me if that's, or if this is tied to YGC closing, if it's anticipated YGC is going to close sooner than that. It's a great space. I mean, I've toured it. I know what goes on there, and it's a great space to be able to run a lot of these programs. We try and get people to go in there. I have somebody from, the creative writing director from LCAD who wants to go in and do writing workshops in YGC. And so it's a great space.
Yeah, I think the goal with probation, as well as the Board of Supervisors and the presiding judge, was not to close YGC until there was a physical space available. So not to give up the space that we have within juvenile probation to other agencies until we were ready to serve the youth. Right. That could have changed, but
I don't want to talk for the probation department, but I get the feeling that they would like to have everything under one roof if they can, not, multiple facilities and all over the place. So I understand that, but they have to have the facilities in order to replace it, here on campus before they close that, because they need that. Those programs really are ingrained, and there's a gardening program that kind of goes on at YGC, and open space to, I'd like to be able to move the pause program to YGC, or do a second one out in YGC, because it's uniquely kind of set up to do something like that. But this is, YDC is open to no matter where you're at.
Yeah, from what I was told, they're going to revamp the whole area inside of juvenile hall from some of that space to make it look a little more like a park environment, kind of like YGC. Right. So that's supposed to be in the plans, but as far as when that's going to be completed.
I just walked the grounds yesterday, and that's going to be a long-term project. Making our hall look like more of a park environment and YGC and all that. Yeah. While before they close YGC.
Yeah. The last thing I wanted to ask, Judge, is if there's a way to get your contact information, because I would like to look into what you were saying about not having residential treatment for minors. There's just some people I know in that network I would just like to have a conversation with about that.
Most of the, so they leave me alone in terms of YDC and who I kind of bring in for, observation and for working things, one-off projects and all of those things. We did a writing competition for YDC with LCAD. That was great. We're going to do an art competition with them also. Anything that's long-term that is like a service provider, somebody who wants to do that is going to have to go through probation and an MOU and go through probation. But I'm a good starting point in terms of being able to come and observe and talk about it and say, I've got this, I think this would be great, as a partner for it. And then I can set up the meetings with Judge Arthur, with Chief Hernandez, whoever needs to, or the assistance from probation in order to the people can actually make things happen.
Yeah, very good. Thank you.
Any other questions from anybody?
I do. I just wanted to commend Judge Ufland for running a great program. It sounds like the kiddos don't have enough resources, so the more that we can do for them, the better off they are. But so I'm Chelsea from Twin Town Treatment Centers. I know you said, Judge Ufland, that you have your YDC that takes place the 2nd and the 4th Friday. Can I get the address for that? And do I have to sign up beforehand to?
Yes,
to
so
observe?
you let me know. If you email me and tell me I'd like to come and observe, then I set that up. I have a coordinator. There is a collaborative courts coordinator. In fact, Jazz, who is on here, is the collaborative courts coordinator for all of those. And there are some confidentiality documents that have to be reviewed and signed when anybody wants to come and do that. I do it in Department 41 here in the juvenile courthouse, so which is in Orange. So it's right in my courtroom where we do that collaborative court.
Okay, perfect. I'll email you so we can set
And
that
they're
up.
it usually runs 9 to noon. With 12 kids on the calendar, we're usually done by noon. So it runs, sometimes it goes in the afternoon, but if you're there for a 9 to noon session, you get a good understanding of what YDC is about.
Got it. Perfect. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Yes. Perfect. Well, thank you. Thank you for being here and for the services that you all provide. These are the services and things that make reentry successful, which is what our goal is.
No, we thank you so much for coming. And yeah, that's part of what we do. So aside from everyone who's here, we have a much bigger network as well. So part of the reason why we record it, so we can share it out to everybody. And so part of what we do is just educate people on resources that are out there, help people better collaborate together, network. And so since I had been to this court, it was like, hey, this is a great opportunity for other resources to come and provide, services to these youth. So we're super grateful that you could come out. I know you have a busy schedule and share with us. And then hopefully we can get some more organizations linked up with the courts and with the youth that are in there.
Yeah, and I'll tell you, one of the things that is important is getting, understanding out to the general public that this is the sort of thing that goes on in juvenile court. When everybody talks about being tough on crime and just institutionalizing everybody and warehousing and all that, and there is no, solution to it, let's just lock them up. They need to know what's going on. The general public, people who make decisions and talk to people who make decisions about resources and programs and things that are going on, they need to know and hear from people who have, knowledge of what's going on, that this is what is actually going on in juvenile court, efforts that are being made in order to try and address recidivism and to correct this rather than just warehouse kids. They need to know, and the only way they're going to know is from people who are part of it. And spread and to use the word, just spread the word that this is what's going on, whether it's YDC or teen court or Grace court, any of that, to share that information.